our plant breeders are getting much better at what they do about meeting relatively pretty strict guidelines, in all honesty, for quality and to have improved productivity and such.
So you see, if you make a wrong decision, you have blown a lot of opportunity. So this meeting becomes super important then, that there is good information for others now in the seed sector to begin an investment. They're putting money on the table and they won't see a return for several years.
Maybe about some scientist telling you, well, that's what's good for you. You should do that just because we tell you. It's about saying, no, we're getting a lot more feedback. And that's a good thing, is to hear from the grower.
The Prairie Grain Development Committee held its annual meeting in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in February. Germination got an inside look at how it functions and why it's so important to the Canadian seed industry.
The origins of PGDC go back to the late 1920s, and so it started with issues with wheat production, and so they wanted to create varieties that were, good, high yielding, high quality, and disease resistant. So those are kind of the three. It started with kind of three committees, which exist to this day. So agronomy, the quality team, and the disease team. And so those in various forms existed in various ways and amalgamated back, I'm trying to say probably back in the 60s or something. And then that became at one point the expert committee, which then went to the Prairie Registration Recommending Committee, which is now known as the Prairie Grain Development Committee. But in brief, what we do is we meet. There are now within the PGDC, besides wheat, we have a wheat, rye, and triticale, but we also have three other committees. So we have one with barley and oat, we have one with oil seeds, and we have one with special crops. And at the end of the day, what the function of all the committees are to create like better agronomic, good quality, and disease-resistant cultivars for growers in Canada for those grains.
PGDC is a forum for the exchange of information relevant to the development of improved cultivars of grain crops for the Western Canadian prairies. The work the group carries out is of vital importance to determining which new crop varieties are grown by farmers and ultimately end up in products on grocery store shelves.
Primarily, we're aiding the developers of the grain. So that is usually the plant breeder. But there's also other experts involved, which could be plant pathologists and food quality experts, to identify which traits are important. So either important in production of the grain or important in the quality of the grain. And so, for instance, a good example might be in oat. There are certain quality parameters like beta-glucan and how much oil is in the seed, that we want to make sure that those are at the proper levels for the consumer, and that the farmers are growing the correct lines, that the Quaker Oat or the General Mills or whoever's making your oatmeal is going to be something that meets what's needed for heart healthy for consumers. So that's how it all kind of integrates. We have our mandate kind of to make sure we're getting the high quality and all that, but when our breeders are, I guess, making those targets, that we can give some advice about where those targets should be so that they can meet those.
So yeah, we're looking to maintain the quality of the genetics currently.
The Prairie Recommending Committee for Pulse and Special Crops is responsible for the testing and evaluation of pulse and special crop candidate cultivars for registration in Western Canada.
In terms of picking the varieties, the breeders pretty much do that for us. They're pretty bright people, and they go through their co-op data rigorously, and it's not often they put something forward that isn't going to have a very good chance of being recommended for registration.
Cultivars are evaluated to ensure they meet or exceed strict standards set by check varieties, with the ultimate goal of providing seed companies and farmers with strong new varieties.
To be better than that. And in the past, yield has been the #1 driver, because ultimately a producer wants more bushels per acre on his or her farm, it puts money in the bank and food on the table. So, but added to that now, we're looking to increase the quality of those bushels.
This is really where there's a lot of powerful information that comes available for the first time. So, clearly there's a lot of candidate varieties that have gone through multiple years of testing. Now we have a lot of data that as a seed distributor we can utilize to decide on, what we might be interested in. And ultimately it's the first set of data that a farmer would look at as well.
If the PGDC recommends a cultivar for registration, the breeder that owns it has the ability to register it and bring it to market.
Well, for Canterra seeds specifically, we have a lot of interest in a wide range of crop types, but in particular, wheat is critically important for our business. This past summer, we announced a joint venture breeding program together with Lima Grain called Lima Grain Cereals Research Canada. That's going to be based here in Saskatoon. And from the testing that we started doing with Lima Grain back in 2012, some of that material is actually starting to make its way through registration trials now. So we have a personal interest as well in some material from our own program. But in addition to that, we certainly recognize there's a lot of value and very, very high performing products from Ag Canada Crop Development Centre and other breeders that we're going to be keenly interested in. There hasn't necessarily been a specific product or quality attribute necessarily that's floated to the surface at this point in time, but we'll step back after this meeting and see if there's anything in particular that we want to look at.
I've been doing this now for 16 years, and certainly within just, I would say, the very recent past 2 or 3 years, we've had far more lines being put forward than have been in the past. And I think what that's a reflection on at the end of the day is that we're getting, our plant breeders are getting much better at what they do about meeting relatively pretty strict guidelines, in all honesty, for quality and to have improved productivity and such.
For the past 17 years, 40 to 55% of all the wheat grown in Canada derives from cultivars developed by breeder Ron DePaw. DePaw attended the PGDC meeting in his new role as a science advisor for CCAN.
This particular meeting is the step to take something that you've got as a finished line, it's an inbred line, and you know a lot about it, and it is now at the peer review process. You're putting it before your peers. You know you've got a wonderful child, but you're putting it before your peers to examine it for agronomics. How will it perform out in the research plots, putting it out before the pathologists for them to look at it for the response to leaf rust, stem rust, stripe rust, fusarium, and common bunt. And they will decide what the response is. I've tested it many, many times. I have a good idea what the response is, but this is peer review. Somebody else gets to look at it. And the same thing for the quality. I've tested it a number of times, but I'm now putting it before the panel of cereal chemist experts, the millers, other people from the grain side to examine it. And that is a peer review process. And so it's, I think, an extremely important process to have a science-based peer review step that this line has sufficient merit for the seed then to get registered, the seed to be multiplied and distributed and promoted so that farmers then have sufficient information to buy the seed. They're taking $1 out of their pocket. They're making an investment. And anybody that makes an investment, whatever the stock is, they should do some due diligence. And this is kind of like providing the data that the farmers will have access to make that investment decision. The seed companies are also using the data here to make an investment decision to obtain the marketing rights to multiply, promote, and distribute the seed. So right now on a new variety, there might be 200 kilograms of seed, maybe up to 400 kilograms of seed, not very much. And they might be paying several $100,000 to get the marketing rights to multiply, promote, and distribute the seed. So it's super important that there be good data good science-based data upon which to make that kind of an investment decision.
There's been a big change, I believe, in bringing far more in the, I guess, kind of call it the downstream end, so the more of the industry people, and certainly even seed grower groups, and even in some cases seed growers themselves on as official voting members to help vet the lines to make sure that, I guess, we're getting a more rounded representation of what is actually what they want to, I guess, grow and sell. So it isn't just, maybe about some scientist telling you, well, that's what's good for you. You should do that just because we tell you. It's about saying, no, we're getting a lot more feedback. And that's a good thing, is to hear from the growers. And actually, sometimes it's actually very encouraging that when we make a recommendation and then we find out later, did you try that line, or and did that actually work as we expected it to? And it's encouraging when it does, and it's kind of somewhat surprising sometimes when they don't pick up a line that you thought was going to be the next great thing. And there's actually some good reasons why it didn't work out for them. But at the same time, finding out when we have our meetings, and particularly when we're in, lots of times I had a discussion with someone the other day, a lot of the best discussions comes when we're rubbing elbows in the coffee time, in the hallway. And, it isn't just about looking at a bunch of charts and tables and numbers and trying to come up with a formula, but actually hearing from the guys that are actually trying to either grow it or market it, and find out from them, well, what are your challenges?
So, I like as a business person the fact that I don't have to create the cake. Okay, the cake is, the demand is there every day. But I would consider the big, sweet, thick icing, which I like icing on the cake. I don't know anybody else like icing. So, the icing on the cake is North America, Western Europe, and markets in Asia are consuming these products now as ingredients. If I asked you today, what was the largest pea market for Canada in the world? Many of you would guess India, right? India is a very traditional pulse market. Well, in 2014, China overtook India for the first time. And not because they're eating any peas, right? It's all about starch extraction for vermicelli noodle production. 1 million tons. Chinese dumplings, mooncakes, vermicelli noodles. So, we see those types of ingredient uses, as, really exciting. Yesterday, to my desk came a new Sun Chip. Frito-Lay PepsiCo launched last Wednesday in the United States a Sun Chip brand called Veggie Chips. And the Veggie Chips, it says it's taste and nutrition like 2 peas in a pod. That's what their thing on the back of the bag is. And the number 1 ingredient is dried yellow peas.
AGT Food and Ingredients Inc. is one of the world's largest suppliers of pulses, staple foods, and food ingredients. AGT Foods was founded on the guiding principle from producer to the world, buying pulses and grains, including lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans, as well as durum wheat, rice, and other products.
January of 2015 was the day that the light bulb went off over the head of the U.S. food industry. It's the day that Cheerios got reformulated to non-GMO ingredients. They really didn't do anything. This was a marketing ploy, right? It was just shore up their supply chain a little bit. But it was their recognition. Or January of 2016, when Campbell's Soup came out and said, we support mandatory GM labeling. That was the first major food company to come out and say that.
We make Cheerios here in Cedar Rapids, and making Cheerios is a pretty simple process. The oat flour comes in, we add a few ingredients, cook it, puff it, and then you put it in a package. People sit around the breakfast table over a bowl of Cheerios. That makes me feel good.
So, things are changing, and demand for alternative flours, including pulse flours, are growing 4 times faster than wheat flours, and ahead of any other specialty flour, including potato. So you can see product launches. 2014, 3,956 pulse-based product launches in North America. Like, look at that trend line, right? We're in the right spot here. So it's a race. Okay, the global race to protein is on. And what I wanted to tickle in your minds as researchers is we have a food opportunity that is compelling. So, I really want to encourage you to link into that market pull-based, engage your growers, your industry, and, attempt to react. Because I think we have a lot of, things that we can be very proud of today in terms of prairie agriculture.
AGT Food and Ingredients is one of many companies on the lookout for improved pulse varieties to use in its products. It is currently marketing the King Red lentil, developed by Bert Vanderberg of the University of Saskatchewan in Sri Lanka.
I mentioned non-GMO because pulses today are all non-GMO. So if I was not an effective marketer of my products, right, I wouldn't mention it. But I am very effective at marketing the attributes that I have. And so I mention it quite, repeatedly. And in the marketing campaigns that we do to the food companies, we mention the fact that they're non-GMO. In terms of the future, today, all I'm willing to say is the pulse industry today, through Pulse Canada, so that is a unification of the position. Today, we don't support the development of genetically modified pulses. And some have said that is a, bury your head in the sand type mentality. I think that ultimately the deciding factor is going to be where the consumer demand goes.
As our plant breeders have developed very new things and also to find out, again, from these companies, maybe are there different directions that we haven't thought of or different innovations. So there's always more improvements that we can certainly make. And sometimes certainly we have to adjust, I guess we call it our guidelines. And so that could be, like I say, for a certain quality parameter, or it could be for a certain disease characteristic, to say, we need to adjust some things a bit. Because one thing you got to remember, we're working with plants and biology and genetics, and those things all change all the time. But we forget sometimes that we're also working with consumers and consumer preferences and how those things can change over time. And so I have to say we're definitely a dynamic group that we need to, and we do I think a very good job of always looking to see, where do we need to adjust maybe our viewpoints and or our targets.
Unless you're registered, unless your product line is registered, you can't sell it in Canada. You can't grow it in Canada without a registration certificate. So it provides a safeguard to those producers and those end users that yes, this material has been evaluated and this is shows to be a good fit for being grown in Western Canada.
According to the Canadian Seed Trade Association, the incremental value of grain produced from Ron DePauw's wheat cultivars exceeds $1 billion. That's why CSTA has dubbed him the $1 billion man.
So once you get it registered, that is only the beginning of the seed companies are going to look at the data and they will decide, yes, I will bid on it, I will multiply the seed. And then it's got to be sold to farmers. So each year there's about 20 varieties of wheat that get support to register. Every year, 20. But there's only a handful of varieties at this time that get over 10% market share. So there's a lot, many varieties are not adopted by producers. So what really is gratifying is when something, you generated the data, you got the support to register, it's multiplied, promoted, and distributed, and sold to producers, and they will continually grow it because it works on their farms. That is the satisfying part, because you know that you have met the industry need.
Over 50 cultivars were recommended for registration at the 2016 meeting, giving breeders a shot at seeing their lines go on to be grown, marketed, and ultimately end up as products on the grocery store shelf.
And registration is just one little step, you have some good genetics, you get it registered, that's an easy step, but then you got to get it out there, multiplied, promoted, and distributed, and it's got to work on the farms. And if it doesn't bring value to the farmers, they're out. They're not going to mess around with something that doesn't work. They're not sentimental.